welcome to episode 103 of the Meet the Farmers podcast. I am your host, Ben Eagle, and today we're picking up where we left off last week with the Oxford conferences. We're looking at the Oxford Real Farming Conference. This year, the ORFC went global for the first time, with dozens of sessions coming from across 6 continents and focusing on numerous different topic areas. We're going to look at the conference on a broad scale today. And to do this, I'm really pleased to be joined by an esteemed panel of guests. I will introduce in a bit, but first, I want to play you a clip from a conversation that I had earlier in the week with Fran, who is Programme Director at the ORFC. Fran, thanks for coming on. Take me back to the time when it dawned on you that you would be organising a virtual conference.
I think like anyone who has been involved in events this year, it was a process of, we obviously, none of us thought that this would carry on until now. So normally what happens, we send out a call for submissions on the 1st of July. And say to the whole ORFC community, who would like to present at Oxford, please send us your ideas, and then we start sifting through them and then start working out what the conference is going to look like. But yeah, we really realised by July that there was so much uncertainty that we were going to have to look at going virtual. And then we started looking at it a bit deeper and realised that it did actually give us those incredible opportunities that you wouldn't have in person in Oxford. So first of all, we could actually go global. We could look to work with partners around the world and start to hear from farmers in, across 6 different continents, which is what we are doing now. We're in the midst of doing it. We are hearing from communities and farmers from so many different small rural communities around the world, sometimes less successfully when their internet connections are a bit slow, but it's just giving a platform to voices that would never normally be heard on this sort of global scale.
And I mean, in terms of when you were setting out to do this, what were your key aims? If you could achieve one thing from it, what would it be?
Oh, I think probably there's a mix of aims here. The reason that we felt we could do it in the first place and say, okay, what gives us the confidence to think that we can say we'll do a global conference? We're a conference that's come out of Oxford every year for the last 11 years. And I think it was because COP is happening in November here. Yeah. And we felt that we needed to have some programming that was a sort of road to Glasgow, so that agroecological and regenerative farmers' voices would be heard at that conference. And they realised that it's obviously farming is a key driver of climate change and a key solution to climate change, and we wanted to make sure that those people would be heard at Glasgow. So that was one of the motivations for doing it. But the other aim, and certainly something that we've always tried to do with Oxford is to hear from people from, diverse voices from every, from obviously always it's been nationally, and then we've brought the odd farmers in from overseas. But this year to really start to hear from people who've got different worldviews, different ways of farming from right across the globe.
Yeah, a lot of the sessions have been attracting, say, 4,000 to 5,000 people, which has been absolutely incredible. Sort of looking at those figures. What is it about Oxford Real, do you think, that continues to attract?
I think it's a really diverse audience, and it's over 50% of the Oxford Real Farm Conference is always farmers, and amazingly we seem to have hit that figure again this year, which is great. But then obviously you've got so many people interested and starting to realise how important food is to so many aspects of our life. So we've got food producers and activists and policymakers and academics and scientists whose passions and work all connect, and that's what the conference has always brought together in Oxford, and has actually been able to do so this year globally.
So Colin, Ruth and Graham founded the conference back in 2010, over 10 years now, and clearly the whole agricultural debate has shifted enormously in that time. What would you say is the relevance of ORFC now, of Oxford Real, and why is it important that Oxford Real continues to exist?
Well, you mentioned Colin and Ruth, and obviously they're still very much at the heart of this conference. And what they set out to do 10, 11 years ago and are continuing to do is have a very radical agenda. So bring together people to consider the food and farming system from a radical perspective. And that's what we really very much is at the heart of what we continue to do. And I don't think it has never, the Oxford Real Farming Conference is now more relevant than it's ever been. We need to provide that platform for those farmers and those academics and those activists to come forward and to provide us with all the incredible ideas and practices that they already have in place. And I really hope that we'll be able to, obviously meet in person again in Oxford in January, but also continue to be able to reach out to such an enormous audience and have, represent those voices that don't normally get heard. So yeah, I mean, we're really looking forward to the next 11 years as well.
Fran, thanks very much and good luck for the rest of the week.
Thank you very much, Ben.
Fran Price there. Now, let's introduce our panel. I am joined today by George Young, a farmer from Essex in the southeast of the UK with a particular interest in agroecological farming. Domini Hogg, who is the founder of London-based company Tried and Supplied, which supports food service providers to drive efficiency and sustainability across the supply chain. And Will Harris, a fourth-generation cattle farmer from Georgia in the USA. Will is also the beef director of the American Grass-Fed Association and was selected 2011 Business Person of the Year for Georgia by the Small Business Administration. Thanks to you all for coming on. Honestly, I really appreciate it. Let's get your thoughts on the conference in general, I suppose, to start. What were some key sessions of interest for you? George, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll go first. I'll be honest, I have still got an awful lot to catch up on. So,
I know what you mean.
Cornucopia of content. I mean, so some of mine have been influenced by things that people said were worth watching, and actually two in particular that sound like they're very similar names, but not quite. I've actually wrote some notes. But Rob Hopkins and Rebecca Hoskins, their two keynotes I thought actually were especially cool. Rebecca Hoskins was a lot about kind of terminology that was used or that it is used in farming and around farming and how it can have negative effects or positive effects. And the thing that really stood out was the civilizations that used to be in the Amazon. I thought that was spectacular, actually, to be perfectly honest. And then, yes, Rob Hopkins, who his was all about imagination. And to be honest, I think you're quite similar to in this regard, Ben, as well.
Okay, where are you going with this?
Just how we think about what our farms are and what farms can be, and that whole ethos about kind of just really kind of imagining what can happen and how things can happen and how you get somewhere. Yep. That was a really exciting session, especially with kind of what I'm trying to push forward with on a food basis. Yeah, really exciting. So I thought those two were two special pickouts.
Super. Will, what about you?
I can't find anything not like. Really pleased at the way that regenerative has kind of dominated the whole voice throughout the conference, and just excited about it.
Yeah. And just finishing the circle, Domini.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a non-farmer, it's really interesting to see what is being discussed. And I think what always strikes me about the Oxford Real Farming Conference is how extensive and broad it is. It's not really, I was fascinated by it, and you don't have to be a farmer to get engaged in the topics. And I would probably pick out the same one as George, as the one that really stood out to me was Rebecca Hoskins' one, and okay. It really kind of made me question the preconceptions, I guess, I have around farming. And in terms of kind of how it compared to last year, thought it was interesting. There's always a kind of overall theme, I find, about the conference. And this year I felt it was agroecology coming out really big, and also kind of how that was in relationship with capitalism. And it's such a big debate. And I think more people who aren't farmers should get involved.
Let's look at key themes, and perhaps focus in, especially if we've got Will and George on the panel, focus in on regenerative ag and on agroecology. Did you learn anything new, perhaps? Will?
Absolutely. And at this point in my career, it's not so much discovering new facts as it is new applications for the things that are starting to make sense for me. I'm struck by the differences in the way I used to farm, which was very linear, very reductive, very scalable, and the way I do it now, which is very cyclical, very complex. And it just keeps more and more things that I'm exposed to resonates with me on how wrong I had it for the first 20 years of my career, and how right I've been, how much in the right direction I've been moving for the last 20 years.
Yeah. I mean, George, you're at the beginning of quite a radical journey on your farm, which if anyone follows you on social media, they'll be aware of this. But what was your take on those messages on the regenerative ag side?
Yeah, so I'm pleased it's quite so in the forefront. There are a couple of like the little bit people's presentations within talks I actually found really useful just for where I personally am at the moment in terms of learning. Because having put in a lot of trees, suddenly you realise you've got, well, I'm sure you also know this, Ben, with the sea bucks on, suddenly you've got to manage them. It's kind of a completely new thing. So there's minor stuff like that. You don't want to worry about that when you're planning a project, do you? So yeah,
you're working out on the way.
Yeah, exactly. It was really good seeing Stephen Briggs. He did a really concise talk on his agroforestry system and some management techniques with it. And actually then there was someone called Andrew Barber, who I hadn't come across before, doing silver pasture, but at genuinely quite close spacings, and how that was working. And that was in quite a, like an actual carbon capture basis as well. So it's really fascinating, because I'll be honest, I'm not really looking at things from a carbon basis, but I mean, maybe I probably should ought to start looking at it.
And on the terms of the wider supply chain, Domini, obviously you work with on more on that side of things day to day, and you have connections with chefs. On the food arguments, was there anything that you learned?
Yeah, I mean, I think one was interesting about the tool for measuring the nutritional content of vegetables, and I think that has an impact for public procurement, for example, and actually procuring for nutritional impact rather than just, you need a carrot. That's one aspect of it. I also think that the what next session was really inspired me to kind of ask the question, what if chefs were part of building an agroecological future for the UK? Because I think there's a lot of opportunities for how chefs could be more integrated into the change that's happening and supportive of that, and I think many would want to be.
Let's turn to that global question. So we had sessions across 6 different continents. Why has it been useful this year to take more of a global approach? George? I
mean, I think it really feeds into the fact that maybe there's finally a realization that tackling some of these agroecological issues on a kind of small scale isn't going to really help. We have to be making sure that kind of what we're doing is happening in all parts of the world as well. And I thought it was really exciting actually to see these producers in other countries and showing what they're also doing. They're also building these really fantastic agroecological farms in their necks of the woods. Like, this movement is not just local to the UK. This is very much a global movement that is happening. And I think the fact that we can kind of make, like, or ORFC have managed to link all that together and form it as more of a global movement, obviously there's a lot more chance for change if that is the case.
Yeah, I mean, one session at the conference that focused on spearheading the agroecological movement across a regional level was Vijay Kumar's presentation about the work he's been leading in Andhra Pradesh, an Indian state with a population of 54 million, introducing and then critically scaling up agroecology across the region and inspiring farmers to adapt their way of farming. I spoke to Vijay about his work and his thoughts on scaling agroecology on a more international level. Vijay, thank you so much for coming on the show. I watched your session with real interest. For anyone who wasn't able to see it, just to give them a little bit more detail, you are leading the efforts of the government of Andhra Pradesh in India in establishing natural farming on a wider scale. You yourself have been involved in community mobilization projects for 25 years or so. And this particular initiative started in 2016, and you've gone from engaging around 40,000 farmers and farm workers to 700,000 today. And if I think I'm right in saying that you're on course to achieve the million target for this year, but the overall objective is to work across the entirety of the 6 million farmers in Andhra Pradesh. We don't have a lot of time today, so we can't go into the detail. I would like to, but in your own words, can you summarize your goals for the initiative? What are you trying to achieve?
Thank you, Ben. Thank you for having me. Primarily, our focus is on improving livelihoods of farmers, because farmers are keeping us alive. They're working day and night, whether it is raining, whether it's hot, whether it's cold. The objective is to reduce the riskiness in agriculture and protect the livelihoods of the farmers. But there's a second objective, which again relates to farmers, but also those who are not farmers. And that is the quality of food that we are eating. We don't even know what we are eating. The food that we are eating is contaminated with chemicals, doesn't have the essential nutrients that it should have. So that reflects on the health of the consumers. So a very important category is the health of our citizens, because we have a population of 50 million. So my dream is that we should positively impact on the health of our citizens. The practices that we are following are completely in harmony with nature. So we're also conserving the environment. We're making agriculture, climate change resilient. But essentially, Ben, I'm doing it for our future generations.
I mean, I'm really interested in the social science aspect behind this, because in essence, what you're doing is you're building it, and you've built a growing movement, encouraging farmers to convert their methods to agroecology. How have you, and I know this is a question on lots of people's lips, but how have you managed to engage so many people in such a short amount of time?
You see, we are building on a investment in social capital that actually started in our state 20 years ago. I was involved in that.
Okay.
So we organized millions of women in the rural areas into women's collectives around thrift, around credit, around financial inclusion, around livelihoods. So these are very vibrant groups. So because of this social network that was already in place, and this is something which resonates with their priorities, so it was easy to scale out, because you see we have 10 to 12 women in a group, and 90% of them have agriculture livelihoods as their topmost priority. So if we work with the group leaders, then they in turn work with 10 members. And the way I see many places, why agroecology is not taking off, if one farmer wants to do it, the others discourage them. So there are people saying that, are you crazy? Are you mad? We're spending so much and still we're not getting the crop. And you think using cow dung, cow urine, or, no cost botanicals will do the trick. So they are dissuaded. But if you have a group, this group is supporting members in making these changes. So that is the difference. So it doesn't happen overnight, and these results have not happened overnight. It's built on a platform of millions of women. 90% women in rural areas of Andhra Pradesh have been organized. So we have close to 8 million women who are already organized. That enables me to take it off so quickly. In all the discussions around agroecology, there is focus only on the technology. This X technology, Y technology, how does it compare with the chemical technology? In my view, the technology package is only 10% of the solution. The rest actually is in taking it to every farmer, in supporting the farmer in making the behavior change. So in the wider discourse, this part has been neglected. You can see any conference, any discussions, any international gathering, it's entirely about, proving that this is right. My technology is better than your technology.
Yep.
So, but you may have the best of the technologies, but you don't have a mechanism to take it to farmers, then you might as well lock up the technology.
Has there been anything over the last 5 years that you've learnt that you perhaps weren't expecting?
The last point that I mentioned to you, the importance of investing in people's institutions, collectives, working through their own cultural traditions, social norms. So that is precisely what the last point is. My basic learning. Farmers want to change. Farmers are fed up with the current chemical agriculture because they know that it is a vicious cycle they are in, but they don't have an alternative. Because you see, the other innovation that we have done is the people who go to farmers are not so-called qualified people who don't know about farming, but they have only degrees from colleges. The people who go to farmers are other farmers.
Yep.
So the champion farmers. So both the credible knowledge dissemination and the presence of this social capital are so critical. This is the basic learning. But there is another learning, and that is the government support is critical for scaling up. Without a government mandate, without the chief minister, without the ministers, the senior officials talking this language. So I was heading agriculture department and I was supposed to be pushing chemicals. So, but as head of the agriculture department, I made a statement saying that, look, this is the future of agriculture. You have to get rid of chemicals. So I had to manage that kind of a contradiction in my own roles.
I mean, you mentioned in your presentation that the principles behind what you're doing are applicable across all 6 continents, but the methodologies themselves might differ. Have you had interest from other Indian states and internationally? And I know that in the presentation you went into this, but for listeners today, can you just talk about some of that interest from elsewhere?
We have interest from more than 9 states in India. So we are in regular touch with them. So we have, because of COVID, they could not actually visit us. Yeah. But now that situation is better in India, so we are having visits from Meghalaya, Kerala, Bihar, Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh. So about 8 or 9 states are very, very interested. And I was also involved in building the self-help group networks in those states. So, so the same methodology can very, very well be used there. I'm also happy that we have a very strong technical collaboration discussions happening with the government of Rwanda, government of Mexico, government of Kenya. So there is a growing international request, and there is a organization called APSA, which represents about 50 countries in Africa. I think they presented in the ORFC also, John Wilson, Million. So they're also interested in learning from this. But what we believe is, as I said, there are principles. The practices have to be customized based on the context. So obviously, whatever we are doing here will not work in other places. But the principles are so simple; they're not difficult.
Yeah.
So it's not difficult for anybody. Yeah. And even in India, in our own state, we are looking at big farmers as to how they are changing, how they are modifying the practices to suit their methods. So we have farmers with 100 acres and about 100 to 200 acres who have devised mechanical methods, who have devised their own innovations to take it to scale.
That's interesting. And I wonder if you can go into a little bit more on that, because I know there'll be listeners who might be saying, oh, what a brilliant framework. It works really well for small scale farmers, perhaps, but what about farmers on a larger scale?
See, nature doesn't distinguish between small and large farmers. Nature's principles are same everywhere. So the innovation has been in terms of how do you prepare the biostimulants. So there people have used mechanization for collection of dung, mixing it up, fermenting it. Then they use tractors to do the spraying instead of manually doing it. So especially it works very well with orchards. So they can run their tractors between the trees. So there are, again, it's a question of commitment. If a farmer knows that she or he has to do it, they'll find out a way of doing it.
Just finally, while I've got you here, what drives you personally? Clearly, you're highly committed to this program, but what is it that inspires you and keeps you going?
Ben, the problem we are facing is so serious. We are in series of emergencies, whether it is farmers' livelihoods, consumers' health. What do I answer my grandchildren? And I feel that in Andhra Pradesh, we have a solution which we have seen is working. So I'm possessed, let us say, that I have the knowledge. It's not perfect. It's still evolving. There's so much more to learn. So there I feel that if there is a solution to this largest problem, then I should put my heart and soul into it. And I'm happy doing it. I mean, it's finally, it's my own happiness.
Yeah. Vijay, Kumar, thank you very much.
I just wanted to say something else.
Yeah, of course.
You see, the problems are very complex, but as I mentioned in my presentation, the solution is simple. We have the agency of farmers through the way they interact with land management and the food system, who can make a huge difference. And we believe, based on the breakthroughs that we have got in the regenerative agriculture over the last 4 or 5 years, so we believe that farmers, through their land management practices, can not only earn decent livelihoods, but the quality of food they produce has very significant health objectives, pollution control. So it virtually meets all the SDGs which UN has and all countries have, are committed to. And still, the recognition that farmer is so important is still not there. And many farmers in India feel that they should give up farming. So I believe that respect for farmers, respect for their work, that is something every citizen should have, because it's they whose work will either keep us alive or kill all of us. So it is that critical. So I feel somewhere that societies are not respecting farmers. We are very happy honoring some 20-year-old person who has become a billionaire through some tech achievements. But a farmer who is working 365 days of the year, struggling so hard. So I feel very strongly that we are not respecting our farmers. And I very strongly believe that farmers are gods. They are the ones who can save the planet.
Let's talk about agri and environmental challenges in different parts of the world. And we've already mentioned that there was actually quite a lot of crossover. Certainly I felt that coming across in terms of the debates they've been having in different parts of the world. But what did you pick up from the conference in terms of shared global challenges, I suppose? Will?
Having been so deeply embedded in American agriculture for 40 years, where the mantra is using technology to feed the world. And there's been such an awakening in the last, really less than a decade, that is called traction, when using technology to feed the world is not the answer. That's probably not what we ought to be doing. And the amount of traction that's been picked up by this movement is really pleasing to me.
I mean, picking up on Will's point on technology, I can't actually remember which session this is, which is maybe a bit bad, but certainly about kind of this will that we don't want to go down this route of roboticism. And it's actually like, these are all capitalist economic drivers from government, and and it's this rally of this trying to start from the ground up and ensure we've got people associated with these things that are grown. Like that is a properly sustainable food system. Getting it so we've got even less people working on the land, even larger farms is not what we want to be doing. Or from an ORFC basis, we want to get more people back on the land, growing proper food and doing it with love and care.
Yeah. I mean, that might be one, actually. In terms of opportunities, what did you pick up in terms of, I suppose, agri opportunities generally? Where is the global agricultural debate right now? The agroecology banner came through strongly, but perhaps in your own regions, and perhaps if we focus on North America, where does the agroecology debate sit right now in a North American context? And do you think we're at any sort of tipping point, Will?
The answer I'll give is not the answer I want to give. I fear that we're not nearly as much at a tipping point as we all would like to be. And I think that to a great extent in this country, and I'll speak for the United States, not all of North America, it's incredibly influenced by our federal farm support program. So often the subsidies flow to the centralized, commoditized, industrialized food production systems. And so often, not only do these programs not incentivize the right things, they absolutely incentivize the wrong things. So I think there are other things, but that is one enormous impediment to the movement.
Domini, from where you're sitting, where is the food debate currently in the UK? And do you think, from what you've learned at the conference, can we sit the UK and Europe in similar camps?
I'm not so sure about the UK and Europe, and I don't know the detail of all the new regulation. But what I do think is that the local message came out very, very strongly, and I think that's a really important one to bring out, because it's not just farmers that need to be better connected with the land, but consumers as well. They don't have any appreciation of food in the way that they shouldn't, and part of it is that it's a little bit out of sight, out of mind. It's kind of like when you're thinking about kind of reducing your food waste, and you put your rubbish bin outside your door, and it's gone, and you don't ever have to think about what happened to it. And I think the same is true for consumers. If it's not local, they don't know their farmers, they don't know how the food was produced, and it's hard to even understand it. And so I think that the local message is really important in bringing consumers back to understanding that. And actually, I think I know it's maybe slightly tangential, but the kind of mental health issue of both, the more that you connect with nature and the food that you eat, I think that has a very positive impact on mental health as well.
Just before we go, perhaps one key take-home message from each of you that you take back from the conference. George? Yeah,
just to continue this work that it sounds like we're all kind of doing, to make sure we are working in a localistic way, getting more people involved in what we're doing on the farming. There really feels like, I suppose that was the almost that central theme, which would have been the agroecological themes, all those things, which is all about people involved in agriculture, not technology, and that kind of love and care involved in what we're doing on the land, from both a food production, fiber production, and a kind of nature allowance, or whatever the word, corridors and those kind of things, really enabling all those things to happen. I suppose that would be my key thing.
Well, what will you take away from it?
I'm going to take off from what Domini was saying about out of sight, out of mind, which is true. And that is further exacerbated by the messaging of big multinational food companies that all of this food is good. It's all produced well. And the kind of education that this conference provided is really it's the sword and shield that producers have to counteract that sort of big budget messaging. So I'm grateful for that.
And Domini, a final word from you.
Yes, I mean, I think probably picking up on Will's point, that I think an awareness of the power struggle that is going on behind the scenes and how that influences the debate is really important. And just to have a much greater sense of humility and a feeling of, we're really part of nature rather than trying to control it. I think those are probably the key things I would take away.
Well, that is all we have time for today, but a huge thanks to my guests today, George Young, Domini Hogg, and Will Harris. Thanks also to Vijay, Kumar, and Fran Price for taking part in the show. Next time, we're returning to a UK focus, and I'll be speaking to Dan Burdett, a third-generation dairy farmer from West Sussex, who did his Nuffield Scholarship on increasing productivity through increasing diversity on UK dairy farms. But until then, have a great week, and I'll see you next time.